Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this August 3rd, 2022 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Delighted to welcome board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its Twitter page at @EDStateBoard_NC. And you can follow the meeting online and see all the materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on its action items. August is an important time of the year for the North Carolina Public Schools. During the month of August, we welcome a new superintendent advisor, Dr. Valerie Bridges, a new principal advisor, Dr. Patrick Green, and a new teacher advisor, Lee Carper. Welcome to all three of you exceptional professionals. We look forward to more formally introducing you tomorrow, but please jump in today into the discussion. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll also tomorrow meet all of the regional teachers of the year and principals of the year. We're also delighted today to have with us a number of our, three of our local superintendents. And if I could ask them to stand, please, and give me a chance to recognize you. First, we have Mr. Barry Williams from Gates County. Dr. Barry Williams from Gates County, Dr. Brad Rice from Stokes County, Dr. Brian Taylor from Hickory City. Welcome, all three of you. Thank you for joining us, and we so appreciate the work you do on the front lines along with Dr. Bridges. Thank you. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. Then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Colleagues, last week you received the agenda and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to our agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Blackburn. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Ms. White. Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Ms.
Ms.
Kamnitz.
Kamnitz. Yes.
Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Ms. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Mr. Ford. Treasurer Falwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. We'll now proceed to our committee meetings and begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee led today by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I'm assisting Ms. Kamnitz this morning as Vice Chair of SLA. And this month we have 2 new business items, and we also have 2 action on read items. I will begin with the first item, which is pertaining to Session Law 2021-180, provided about $1 million total to implement curricula, standards, and professional development in the area of the Holocaust education. This is known as the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act update. And before us, we have the person who is going to be walking us through this item this morning. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, members and advisors of the board. It is my honor to be here to provide an update on the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act on behalf of the Office of Academic Standards. My name is Lori Carlin, and I'm the Section Chief for Social Studies and Arts Education. The North Carolina Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act is based on the intent articulated in the Never Again Education Act, which was passed on May 29th, 2020 by the United States Congress. The Never Again Education Act encourages the development and dissemination of accurate, relevant, and accessible resources to promote understanding about how and why the Holocaust happened, along with the development, dissemination, and implementation of principles of sound pedagogy and best practices for educators for teaching the Holocaust. The Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act provides funding to achieve this important work. For fiscal year 21-22, $350,000 were provided for the development of resources and an elective. For fiscal year 22-23, $450,000 will be available for continued resource development, design, and delivery of professional development. According to the North Carolina legislation, the State Board of Education and NCDPI bear responsibility for reviewing existing standards in all content areas to identify possible areas of integration for new resources. Additionally, we are charged in partnership with our North Carolina Holocaust Council friends with facilitating the design of a new elective course for middle and/or high school that may be offered by PSUs. NCDPI and PSUs will work together to ensure that quality resources are provided and that there is ample professional development. The North Carolina Holocaust Council and NCAT are also named in legislation to facilitate professional development. The timeline for this work has been established, and the initial memorandum of understanding between DPI and the NC Holocaust Council has already been processed. The NC Holocaust Council is already hard at work convening content experts for the work ahead. NCDPI consultants are working to identify relevant standards and provide guidance to the Council. Resources will be developed throughout this school year. The 2023-24 school year will provide an opportunity for high-quality professional development as teachers prepare to utilize resources and potentially the elective course in fall 2024. And of course, there will be ongoing professional development. We will be providing the board with periodic updates on this work as it happens, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carlin. Are there questions, comments from my colleagues?
Yes, sir.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Just one question. It said middle school or high school. Is that left up to the PSU to decide?
Yes, sir.
What level? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I would imagine this initiative would be located in the area of history, social studies?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Other questions, comments?
I say that, but it is housed within the entire Office of Academic Standards. We're all a part of it.
Very excited to hear more about it as the progress continues. Very good. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Dr. Carlin. The next item on the agenda is also a new business item, and this pertains to the Research and Recovery Roundup, a series of white papers, and this particular white paper is going to focus on internet access around the factor of geography, and we will learn in just a minute that, of course, we know this is new information to us. The access is diminishing the further we go from the urban areas out to the remote rural areas across the state. So with that said, we're ready for the presentation. And that is going to be presented by our team of presenters. Here we go. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. Kaylin Clifton, Research Analyst at the Office of Learning, Recovery, and Acceleration. Today we will discuss our fourth post in OLR's Research and Recovery Roundup blog series. This post focuses on the relationship between location, internet access, and learning loss, especially in ELA. OLR believes that this is the first large-scale quantitative evidence that home internet access may have influenced student academic outcomes during the pandemic. I grant that this conclusion may seem at least somewhat obvious. That's good. But we should always check our intuitions, because our intuitions are always at least somewhat imperfect. We should continually gather evidence, because that's how we refine our understandings. In short, evidence enhances our ability to build compelling, broadly appealing, well understood, policy-relevant arguments, even when, or perhaps especially when, the conclusion seems obvious. For example, I think many of us, myself included, experienced a bit of surprise when we first saw the learning loss report back in March, but the state is better for it. Today's knowledge and future knowledge as yet unknown would be impossible without it. Here are 3 general findings. Rural students have lower levels of home internet access than their urban peers. This difference may have influenced differences in academic progress during the 2020-2021 school year. Notably, the association between home internet access and academic progress was much stronger during the 2020-2021 school year, attesting to the relative importance of home internet access during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Let's pause here and focus first on the top purple line. In 2020, school staff estimated the percent of students at their school with home internet access. The top line averages those estimates by locale, whether city, rural fringe, rural distant, or rural remote. Rural areas are ordered according to their distance from the nearest urbanized area. I'll briefly define these before moving on. For the sake of time, we will say that cities are very large, very densely populated areas, such as Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Wilmington. These students are about 39% of my sample. Rural fringe. These are urban adjacent areas, such as those in Cabarrus County, outside of Charlotte, or Orange County, between Greensboro and Raleigh-Durham. These students are about 26% of my sample. Rural distant, a bit farther out, such as my hometown in Rockingham County, or my undergraduate alma mater in Watauga County. These students are about 18% of my sample. And finally, we have rural remote, farthest out in counties like Beaufort, not to be confused with our neighbor in South Carolina, Beaufort, or Bertie in the east, as well as Ashe or Cherokee in the west. These students are about 2% of my sample. In the blog, we have a map of these locales around the state, and we also link to a bit more information on the definitions of these locales. Looking back, specifically at the left half of the top line, schools in city and rural fringe areas estimated that about 85% of their students had home internet access in 2020. But this line turns sharply downward as we move farther out, telling us that our less proximate rural schools estimated that their students were about 5 percentage points less likely to have home internet access in 2020. Over the course of the entire state, this adds up to many students without home internet access throughout the state, but disproportionately in rural areas. Let's look now at the bottom line, which displays average effect sizes representing our measure of learning loss by locale. Recall that greater learning loss is a more negative number, here corresponding to downward movement along the y-axis. We see a remarkably similar trend. The line features the same general shape, including the same sharp downward turn into less proximate rural areas. This tells us that students in our farthest areas lost about 30% more than students in cities or city-adjacent areas. In the full blog post, we show that this difference is largely accounted for by differences in earlier grades. This rural-urban difference is largest in grade 3, where rural students experience about 60% more loss than their urban peers. And I'd like to note that these estimates are adjusted for a series of demographics, race, sex, economic disadvantage, as well as mode of attendance. And this allows us to conclude that these rural-urban differences are not influenced by differences in student attendance or characteristics, so therefore there must be something else at play. To summarize this slide, as we move farther from cities, internet access decreases while learning loss increases, suggesting that learning loss, locale, and internet connectivity are related, that perhaps differences in home internet access between locales also influence differences in achievement between locales. Next slide, please. To directly explore the relationship between internet connectivity and learning loss, we averaged learning loss by county and linked it to a measure of home internet access provided by the federal government's American Community Survey. That's what we see here. This scatter plot shows the association between learning loss and home internet access in 2 years, 2018 and 2021. Each dot represents a county with a certain level of learning loss, and a certain level of home internet. For example, the gray, or maybe it's blue on your screen, dot, farthest to the right, at the very tip of the gray or blue line, that's a county with 91% home internet access and learning loss of negative 0.10, or relatively high internet and relatively low learning loss. Let's look first at 2018 in purple near the top of the slide. The purple line of best fit has a slight upward slope, telling us that higher levels of internet access were associated with slightly greater academic gains pre-pandemic. But look now at 2021 in blue, or again maybe gray on your screen. The blue line is much steeper than the purple. Taken at face value, we would say that home internet was 2.5 times more important to academic progress during the pandemic than before. Now, these data do not allow us to pinpoint the true causal effect of home internet on student academic progress. That is to say that we cannot yet estimate the independent value of home internet as it pertains directly to student academic outcomes. However, given the evidence here, OLR believes that it is fair to conclude that home internet access had a meaningful and positive effect on student ELA progress during the pandemic. As I mentioned before, we should and will continue to test this conclusion, checking our intuitions and refining our understandings. In the meantime, the state should consider ways to increase home internet access throughout North Carolina, especially in distant and remote rural areas. If that's not possible, then we need to begin considering ways in which we can mitigate future losses perhaps caused by lack of home internet, which again, disproportionately affect rural areas. The floor is now open for comments, questions, and/or concerns.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clifton, and I will turn to my colleagues if you do have questions or comments. This is a very timely, very important study. It is one of the white papers, I believe. It's also part of the blog series. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. On the OLR website, you can find it linked on the right-hand side.
I suppose my question is, at some point, I think a report must go over to the General Assembly, maybe at the end of this year. I'm not sure. Did I read that somewhere? No. How will the information, it was funded by the General Assembly, how do you have any idea where this is going to go, maybe in legislation? What's the plan for? Very important white papers, and the findings are very, very crucial, very important to our school districts. Any thoughts on
Dr.
the
Moore.
next steps?
Sure. So part of the effort here was to continuously update not only the board, but the field on what we were finding with the work that's happening in the Office of Learning Recovery. As you know, the pandemic, we've talked a lot about this pandemic and the impact being a multi-year event, looking at 3 to 4 years. We expect to continue to collect data. We'll talk a little bit later about another round of the Lost Instructional Time Report. With regard to informing the General Assembly, the superintendent and members of the OLR team actually presented at the House Education Committee last Monday. So, as we are directed, we'll certainly go and meet and present. But at this time, we don't have any additional reporting obligations to the General Assembly other than the regular course of work that we do.
How frequent are the white papers published?
We are currently planning to put one out every month on a regular schedule, and there was at a previous board meeting, I think we'd listed out some of the different topics over the course of the next year. However, as data and other issues become available to us, if we can put an additional paper out in the course of that month that's not within the regular schedule, we'll do that as well. The idea is to provide as much timely information as we possibly can.
Responding to the legislation.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And we will move on to additional questions. Oh, definitely. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Dr. Oxnard. I just wanted to make a quick comment. It made me, I really appreciate you sharing this data with us. As educators, so often, sometimes we are only in our schools and only in one region of our state, and it definitely amplifies the idea that we have to constantly consider and remember that no matter the zip code, that we want to make sure that all of our children have access to what they rightfully deserve. And so thank you so much for just having that, and I look forward to working with everyone and us continuing to make sure that we're providing the resources and all the things that are needed in order to make sure that our kids are getting all the things that they deserve. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well said. Ms. White?
At some point, as you're continuing this, this line of investigation, will there be any concrete data that would be zip code or perhaps LEA specific about infrastructure needs? From what I'm gathering, this is not a device issue. This is not giving a child a laptop. This is not giving them, I think it's access in the home. So will you be able to capture data that would allow us to have conversations with those that provide those types of services so that we can pinpoint thousands, dare I say millions of dollars were provided as a result of COVID through funding through the CARES Act that at some point will be expended. And so once those funds are gone, this need will still be there. I think it's important for us, and I don't know whether that's in your wheelhouse or whether it lies in another camp, but we do need to get perhaps a list of areas in our state with the highest need for infrastructure for broadband access.
Yeah.
TNT, Verizon, whomever.
Yes, I think that's right. I will say, just speaking for myself, I am always looking for new data to work with. In this case, we pulled two different measures of internet access, those being those estimates provided by school personnel and the ones captured in the American Community Survey, this federal survey. But I think you're correct that there is probably more granular data out there at the zip code level, or it could be that we have connections that may in some way be able to get a hold of the addresses that internet providers serve, and through some kind of creative linkages and then maybe a few assumptions, we would be able to say, well, you live at this address, it shows up on this list, therefore we believe you have broadband internet access, which would then give me a student level data set that we could explore in much more robust ways.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You know what, I was just thinking, would probably be a good idea to find a way to get the white papers in the hands of our EPPs, our schools and colleges of education. Maybe that's already in play, a plan for that to happen, but communicating with our higher education stakeholders, especially with their interest in research and the issues that you are uncovering through these white papers would be very helpful.
Thank you. I think it's a good point as well.
Okay, very good. Another question, Vice Chair Duncan.
One last quick question. Is this data capture where broadband exists, but the whole household cannot afford to purchase the service that would be available?
The measure that I work with is specifically the percent of households in a county that have broadband. Now, counties are, in most cases, fairly large. So it could be that even within a county that has high saturation, so to speak, that the fibers necessary or the satellites necessary do not cover the entire county, which goes back to the earlier question about having more granular data that would allow us to say, well, it is actually available, the infrastructure is there, but homes are just not plugged into it. So that it's definitely possible that a lot of different scenarios it's there, but you don't have access to it, or it's just not there at all, therefore you cannot access it.
Yeah, I think at some point some research into urban areas where broadband is available, but there's a lack of connection has also got some value.
Yes.
I understand it's not the subject of this study, but
Yes.
I think that would be valuable information as we go forward as well.
Yes, sir. As I think the second slide shows, even in urban areas or areas that are just outside of urban areas, you're still at only about 85% as estimated by school personnel. Yeah.
Vice Chair Duncan, from a rural area, yeah,
That's fine.
she called him. So I was gonna say.
That's
So,
fine.
yeah, sorry.
Absolutely.
It's two different issues. So one is down east and out west, there is not broadband across the whole region. parents just cannot afford internet service. So we could possibly address that through the school system. But getting the internet out to all of the areas is going to be a real challenge for us.
Thank you for that insight. Other comments?
So I would like to say that this is an issue whose facts are changing every day. There is, as we speak, improvements being made to this challenge, and I'm wondering if the Governor's Education Advisor, Jeff Coltrane, would like to comment.
Sure, and thank you, Superintendent Truitt. The budget that the General Assembly passed in November and the Governor signed included like $700 or $800 million that was specifically targeted towards increasing broadband access across the state. And so the Department of Information Technology through the Broadband Infrastructure Office is in the process of currently deploying those funds and grants out to providers and the local communities. We can get more information on sort of how they're doing that and then what data they're also using to help target those funds more strategically.
Yes, and to Jeff's point, there's two things happening. We are subsidizing those who cannot afford internet or broadband access, as well as either paying for low orbit satellites that work, or are in some cases bringing last mile internet service to rural areas. Particularly, that would be more likely to happen in the east than in the west. But again, this is changing with each passing week and getting better.
That's good news. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we will continue on with the SLA agenda. We're down to the action on first reading items. We have two of those items. One is coming forward, and this is the update on the standards revision. And we are looking at three areas that are to undergo revising. That is science, helpful living, and physical education. So we have our presenter at the mic. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. We appreciate the opportunity to bring updates on the K-12 Science and Healthful Living Standards Revision timeline. We also will have an update at the end. We do have an ask. That is why we are on action on first read, because we do have a recommendation or an ask of the board. The first slide just takes a look at our policy that guides our work. So SCOS 012, that is what outlines our standard review, revision, and implementation process. The next slide is the internal procedures manual. Where we are currently in our process, you can find greater detail on pages 12 through 18, templates, links, all sorts of details on where we are as we work through this timeline. As we spoke last month, we will talk about completed action since the last time we stood in front of you. We have closed the stakeholder survey window for both science and healthful living. Healthful living contains two areas. We have health education as well as physical education. So those survey windows have closed. We have also selected DRC, Data Review Committee members for science, and the Data Review Committee members in healthful living have been reviewed, and a number of them have been selected, but we put reviewed there because we are looking at expanding that committee, and I'll show you a few slides in just a moment to give detail on that. 6 interviews have been completed for science, as well as 2 focus groups. So those are our completed actions since last month. Just a little information on the Data Review Committee. This team gathers, these are educators from across the field who will gather and review the raw data and trends themes on the current standards. So the all stakeholder survey that was out, the PSU survey, focus groups, interviews, research on other state standards, national frameworks, all of that will be compiled and will be given to the Data Review Committee to review. They will then look extensively at the data and come up with recommendations. So they will help organize and streamline that data so that when the standards writing team picks that up, they have the themes and trends already laid out. As we reviewed the applicants, I wanted to give you just a few details on how that happened. They were all reviewed under a blind rating system, so names were taken off of all applications, and members of other divisions or other offices, such as the Office of Charter Schools, regional directors, exceptional children, they assisted with the reviewing and rating of the applicants. And then we made every effort to ensure that diversity and representation was a part of the data review committee, and we will do the same for the standards writing teams. We wanted to give you a look at the DRC applicants for each area. This is for science, so this slide represents the applications that we received. You will see that all regions were represented in the applications. We had 148 total applications from across the state for those that were interested in serving on the data review committee. The next slide shows those that were chosen for the science data review committee. Out of the 148, we have chosen a team of 27 to represent the state across regions, diversity-wise, to do this work for the science standards revision. The next slide shows physical education, and these are the DRC applicants. You can see that we had 5 regions represented in the applicants. We had 9 total applications from across the state for those interested in the data review committee. The next slide shows those that have been chosen members so far, and that I want to make sure I say so far because we are going to ask that we have time to expand that team. So far we have chosen a team of 6, and we feel that we need more members on that team to represent the state and represent the students in North Carolina. For health education, this slide represents DRC applicants. We received 17 applications from those interested in doing the work with the Health Education Data Review Committee. We had most regions represented with the exception of 1. This slide shows, the next slide shows those chosen so far. So again, we have chosen 8 to begin the DRC team for health education, but we feel that we may need extra time and extra members to represent the state. Currently in progress, we are selecting the standards writing team for both science and healthful living. The survey feedback, focus groups, and interviews that have been completed, that data has been given to the Office of Learning Recovery, who is helping us compile and organize that data. The PSU survey collection is ongoing. I will talk about that in just a moment to give you a brief look at what we've done so far. And then the remaining focus groups and interviews for science have been scheduled and will be complete in the next couple weeks. For the PSU survey, we wanted to highlight that this survey opened May 12th. We sent information to, you can see all the roles on the slide, science liaisons, superintendents, regional directors, charter school leaders across the board to reach out. And the ask is that these leaders, district leaders, charter school leaders, gather a team of experts in their district to give feedback on the current standards in science, physical education, and health education. We also sent an email directly to all superintendents on Thursday of last week, letting them know which surveys they may be invited to give feedback that they haven't done so yet. And our team will also begin making calls to our liaisons and contacts in all the districts. So that's where the PSU survey communication is at this point. Our next steps, we will finalize the SWT for science and healthful living, as well as the DRC for healthful living. We will close the PSU survey. We have a date in mind for science. Healthful living, we are hoping to leave a little open a little longer, and I'll explain that in just a moment. We will submit the remaining data to OLR as they assist with that work, and then science is scheduled to meet with the DRC to kick off their work the week of September 6th. So we come before you this morning with an ask for a delay, an up to 6-month delay in the standards revision timeline for healthful living, which includes health education and physical education. We will keep science on track. We feel that that timeline, we can hit some of our goals with science, and maybe we do need extra time with health education and physical education. Implementation year would remain the same. So we would keep the 24-25 implementation year. What would happen is the installation year would be shortened to accommodate the delay. The installation year is the year between when the board approves the standards and standards are expected to be taught. That is when we create support documents, glossaries, unpacking documents, parent guides, crosswalks, all of those resources that teachers can have as they start the implementation of the standards. Our goal is to have at least 80% participation on the PSU survey. We have not hit that in any of our areas yet. Science, as of this morning, we were close to 70% participation across PSUs, and we feel we can get at least 80% by August 22nd. For health and physical education, both were at 44% as of this morning participation on PSU surveys. We also would take this time and the delay to ensure that we had regional representation for the Healthful Living, DRC, and SWT. The earlier slides you saw, we are not there yet with those teams. So we would work to make sure that those teams were representative across the state. Questions?
Questions of my colleagues? It sounds like you do have a plan in place to utilize that 6-month
We do.
period of time. The question I have is, I wonder if in the real world of teaching, classroom teaching, content, curricula, would Helpful Living and PE sometimes be taught by the same person, the same teacher? If we're avoiding this,
possible.
could those committees be combined?
It's possible. There are 2 separate sets of standards, and we are really being cognizant of the workload of teachers with that committee. It's a lot just to do one set of standards, so to ask maybe the same set to do both, we felt like maybe would not be as reasonable to ask teachers to do that. We know they have a lot on their plate anyway, and this is an extra ask of them. But there are several teachers that teach both.
Very good. Other questions? Superintendent Truitt, if you could weigh in.
So, the comment that I would like to make is that, a week ago, we only had 20 PSUs who had responded to our request for, feedback for the standards for healthful living. And then now, Dr. Marr and Dr. Hemphill and Dr. Day have all done an incredible job of reaching back to PSU leadership to say we really need your feedback, and now we're up to 44. So we're hoping that it will just take a couple of months to get the representation that we need, and to get closer to that 80%.
So you are making progress as a result of the direct calls?
That's correct, but it's not enough. We need
Not enough,
Yeah.
no. Okay, so that is the ask of the state board, and we will consider that tomorrow when we take our vote. Thank you so much, Dr. Day,
Thank you.
for all the hard work that's coming out of your unit, your division, standards
Thank
and
you.
curriculum.
Thank you.
And then we will move on to the next item, which is also an action on first reading, SLA 2, and this is the approval of the revised digital learning standards. So we have before us, the team is Drs. Wren, Dietrich, and McBride.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Thank you. I believe that this topic falls right in line with the report we just heard. So I think it's quite fortuitous that both of these items are coming before you this morning. Dr. McBride and I are here to present an updated version of the original digital learning plan. The original digital learning plan was put in legislation in 2015 in partnership with the Friday Institute and to support growth and continuous improvement in the digital age learning. What we have seen is the digital age learning has evolved, especially over the last several years with a pandemic, in case folks haven't heard when that occurred. But when the pandemic hit, it showed that we, as education needs to improve through digital age learning, that this plan also needs to evolve and improve. So Dr. McBride has done a fantastic job, and I work with her team to present to you today a new digital learning plan that we think will continue to enhance the learning that goes on in classrooms every day. So thank you, Dr. McBride.
I'm a little shorter than my boss. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and the listening public. As Dr. Dietrich said, I am Ashley McBride, and it has been my distinct privilege to facilitate the work of this updated digital learning plan. Next slide, please. The original digital learning plan was designed primarily as a state-level action plan. One of the goals for writing this updated version was to create something that reflected every level of the education system, including students, schools, PSUs, and DPI. The first step to updating the digital plan was to update the framework and ensure it included the focus areas that were most needed according to research and the current landscape of digital teaching and learning across our state. To accomplish this, we looked at the current frameworks created by leading educational technology organizations. These included the Future Ready Framework, ISTE's Essential Standards, and COSIN's Framework of Essential Skills. The graphic you see on this slide is a result of a deep dive into what we were able to accomplish under the 2015 plan and of that research. The final sections identified as our 5 focus areas include leadership and vision, human capacity, curriculum, instruction and assessment, data privacy and cybersecurity, and technology, infrastructure, and devices. In the very center of our framework is the focus of all of this work, ensuring that we build the best student learning experience possible for the students of North Carolina. Next slide. With the framework drafted, we wanted to build a great working group that represented not only each of the 8 regions in our state, but also represented various roles within our schools and PSUs. So we found 54 individuals by identifying a representative from each region who served under the following roles: District Administrator, Director of Technology, School Administrator, School Library Media Specialist, Instructional Technology Facilitator or equivalent coaching role, Classroom Teacher, and IT Technicians. These individuals worked from December 2021 through April 2022 to create a plan that is student-focused and based on the most recent and reliable research. To ensure that student and parent voices were considered in the creation of this plan, the working group designed interview questions and then reached out to parents, students, and teachers. The team was able to complete these standardized interviews with 70 parents. These parents were most concerned about seeing their children engaged in various learning activities that appropriately blend the use of technology with hands-on and group activities to challenge them to think more critically and creatively. They also report that they want less skill and drill programs for their students. Additionally, we saw that many parents requested resources for them to better understand what technology is being used with their students, how it is being used, and why it is being used. We interviewed 68 elementary level students, and some of their answers were very fun. They want to do activities in class that include more hand-on experiences. They did mention some platforms that they are ready to stop using because they are skill and drill type programs. Specifically, they mentioned how much they love STEM, robots, working with technology in groups with classmates, reading books instead of passages. Oh, and there were a lot of requests for more recess time. We interviewed 65 secondary students who want a multifaceted approach that allows them to be creative and actively engaged in their own learning. They want a combination of paper, pencil, internet, digital tools, hands-on group work projects, student-led or student input. They want print resources, collaboration, and less lecturing. And 70 teachers were interviewed, and they reported that they need technology that is regularly and predictably refreshed so their resources are not out of date. They also report that they need more time for allowing students to do more creative and project-based learning, more time for training and planning appropriate technology-rich learning experiences, and appropriate support for technology usage in the classroom. Once we had the base research, the data from our interviews, and spent some time writing the draft of this updated plan, the digital teaching and learning team solicited feedback from various groups. The plan was presented to school technicians at the North Carolina Technology and Education Conference, the teacher advisory group with the support of Ms. Julie Pittman, the Principals Advisory Group with the support of Mr. Tabari Wallace, and a group of Chief Academic Officers with the support from Ms. Sneha Coltrane, and the Chief Information Officers, Technology Directors Steering Committee, that's a lot of words, they also gave us some feedback as well. This feedback was used to refine the plan and make it what you have been presented with for today's meeting. So we're very excited to present to you our updated version of the North Carolina Digital Learning Plan. The following goals that I will share with you are overarching goals that are intended for all levels of public school institutions, including DPI, PSUs, and individual schools. The specifics of each of these goals for each of these levels are included within the full Digital Learning Plan document. These goals are intended to be viewed with a growth mindset and are based on the most recent research available, with the mindset that growth in these goals will support exceptional student learning experiences. Leadership and Vision contains 2 goals. The first is that a shared vision for digital teaching and learning is established and communicated with all stakeholders. The second asks that at all levels, that vision is used to effectively plan and implement action steps to carry out the shared vision. The second section of the plan is human capacity. Having the correct individuals and professional learning structures in place are necessary to be able to carry out the action steps aligned to the vision as described in Section 1. There are 3 goals listed in the human capacity section. Our first goal is to ensure that all staff have continuous access to quality professional learning that is utilized and accessed on a regular basis for continued growth. To adequately provide this professional learning, our second goal is to ensure that staff have the support personnel in place through the consistent and equitable access to instructional technology facilitators and school library media coordinators to support the implementation of digital teaching and learning strategies. Finally, we need to ensure that technical staff is available to effectively support all staff and students to ensure minimal disruptions to teaching and learning. The third section of this plan addresses goals that directly impact curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Our first goal is to provide all staff access to digital content that is continually vetted and aligns with curriculum and assessment expectations for student learning ability levels. To support staff and students beyond the use of those basic curricular needs, our second goal is to provide supplemental resources to staff and students through physical and digital collections. With those resources in place, we aim to have all staff demonstrate mastery of the North Carolina digital learning competencies to create blended and personalized learning experiences to improve student outcomes. Next slide, please. With the introduction of vetted and aligned curriculum, instruction, and assessment resources to create those blended and personalized learning experiences for students, we need to make sure that we keep all of our students and staff data safe and secure. The fourth section of our plan requires that we align data privacy and cybersecurity policies and procedures with current best practices and federal and state laws. We also want to make sure that we stay up to date with those policies and procedures by implementing a process for continuous improvement of data protection and risk management. While these policies, processes, and procedures provide guidance on how we prevent and respond to attacks, the best prevention, as stated in the third goal, is to provide and communicate professional learning around the importance of cybersecurity and data privacy for all stakeholders. That includes students, parents, faculty, and staff. Our fifth and final section for this digital learning plan is technology, infrastructure, and devices. Our first goal is to ensure that all learning spaces are equipped with appropriate, functional technology to facilitate student growth and learning. To make sure the hardware and software purchased for our learning spaces are able to connect and be utilized to the fullest extent, our second goal is to ensure that all schools have the infrastructure to support digital teaching and learning. Finally, we want to allow students to continue to access information and learning beyond the walls of our classrooms by making sure that students and staff have appropriate access to internet at school and at their residence. To support all of the goals listed in the Digital Learning Plan, we've included Digital Learning Progress Rubrics in this document. The intent of these rubrics is to provide growth markers for schools, PSUs, and DPI to be able to focus on elements of these goals and grow towards those markers one step at a time. These rubrics are not intended to be a way to grade schools or PSUs. These rubrics are intended to provide information for discussions, action plans, support, and advocacy efforts. The school rubric is not reported out to DPI. This rubric is intended for schools to self-assess their current digital teaching and learning landscape, and for PSU leadership to determine what supports are needed by the schools that they serve. The PSU rubric data can be used by the PSU to create action plans that support growth in one or more goal area. Additionally, the PSU rubric is reported out formally every other year to DPI. This report is not a grade or assessment of the PSU. Instead, this data is to be used only to better understand what support DPI needs to provide to the entire state, to each region, and to each individual PSU. A new addition to the Digital Learning Progress rubrics is the DPI rubric. This rubric will be completed annually by DPI and reported out to the State Board of Education. In addition to the data from this rubric, we will also present you with our current year's action plan for addressing our own internal growth and projected plans for the following year to continue that growth. These action plans will be presented not only with the data from our rubric and the reported support needs according to the PSU rubrics, but also any field data that we have to support our decision for these plans. To roll out this new digital learning plan, we will begin by, well, if you approve it, we will begin by communicating it out to the field through traditional communication means, including our various newsletters, listservs, and regional consultant communications. We will also share it in our bi-weekly technology director meetups and our website. This fall, we will attend and discuss this plan during regional meetups. Our digital teaching and learning regional consultants will take care to follow up with PSUs that they serve. We also intend to schedule to hold open virtual office hours that allow for questions and clarifications around this plan. It is our intention to start collecting data with the new Digital Learning Progress rubrics in the summer of 2023 in conjunction with our annual DLMI data collection. This will allow PSUs to have a full year to understand and request support for understanding around this document before they are asked to complete the rubric. Thank you so much for providing us the time to share this with you. We'll now take any questions you may have for us.
Thank you, Dr. McBride. Very, very thorough, very interesting presentation of where we stand with our revised version of our digital learning standards. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Vice Chair Duncan.
So, in terms of the department, what is the amount of money involved in rolling this out? And where does it come? What budget?
This comes from the Digital Learning Initiative, which is state legislated, as we have about $4 million for that purpose total. But there's a lot. The breakdown of this probably, if you include our initiatives and what we're doing, probably about $2 million of that $4 million.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the PSUs, is there any allocated? I mean, they're being asked to do some things as part of this initiative. Is there any funding allocated to the PSUs in that regard for the work that they're expected to complete?
So as of right now, no, we do not have funding to give to PSUs. We do that through our Digital Learning Initiative grants. And as was stated, this is a growth plan. And this is just research-based best practice. This is kind of the backbone of our digital learning initiative. And we put a big spotlight on where we need to be, and then we use this document to make sure that we're making the best decisions to get everybody there.
And to add to that, I think one of the things that is so critical for this, and the reason we want these rubrics to be filled out correctly from the PSUs, is that it gives us an avenue to advocate. Here's what they need. This is what we're hearing from the field, and this is what they need, so that we can advocate for them
to you, to the General Assembly, and to others so that we can help get them the resources they need.
Last question, if I can. One of the slides said mastery required of all staff members. Can you define what staff members means in that context?
Certified staff. So we have digital learning competencies for administrators and teachers. So when we said staff members, the intention was certified staff members.
So if you have a teacher, our younger teachers are very technology savvy, to say the least. If you have a teacher of greater tenure who's an excellent teacher, but perhaps not as savvy with technology, what
So those digital learning
place for that?
So those digital learning competencies that we mentioned, those are already in legislation and part of our licensure CEU requirements. So that's already a piece that's been put into place. We just wrote it into the plan to make sure that we bolstered that.
Would that combine with my last question? Does it comport with what the CEU requirements are?
Yes.
Very good. That's a very good question. Other questions or comments? I do have a question about the rubrics. The one that, the rubric, the category that is done by the PSU and submitted to the agency. So have you, this went into play in 2016, so have you collected from the PSUs the rubrics?
Yes, we have collected the rubrics from the 2015-2016 version of this plan, and we have gone through the data. One of the things that we did in preparation of updating the plan was I did some focus groups from various school districts, tech directors who regularly fill out this plan biannually, and asked them what their issues were with how they felt they did with the rubrics and things like that. One of the things that they said was it was very like it would say sometimes, all the time, and there weren't hard numbers around it. So what one person would put as sometimes, another person would put as all of the time. So we cleaned up a lot of that language. So we do have the data from those other rubrics.
So are the criteria, are the criteria the same per rubric, or does it differentiate at the agency level?
It differentiates at each level. So there's a school-based rubric that speaks directly to what you should be seeing in schools. According to research best practices, there's a PSU rubric that talks about PSUs and what you'd see at the PSU level. And then there's a DPI rubric to hold us accountable as well.
And I just want to add to that, we're very excited about the DPI rubric. We believe that that is a good thing for us to do to make sure that we're staying on point with our mission and vision, and to make sure we're providing the right support and resources to help the PSUs, because that's what we're here for.
Sounds great. I love rubrics. That's kind of odd, isn't it? So I'm looking forward to a report on the rubric outcomes.
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions or comments? If none, great report.
Thank you. Just remember, it's a growth mindset, so we want everybody to grow. Thank you.
So that concludes SLA for today.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. At this time, I'd like to recognize Dr. Dale Cole, our superintendent from Clay County, who I inadvertently missed this morning. Superintendent Cole, thank you for being with us and for your leadership in Clay County. We'll now turn to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, led by Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
Good morning, Chair Davis and colleagues. I'm Amy White. I serve on the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee along with Ms. Jill Kamnitz. We have several items for discussion today. The first item is an action on first read, and this is an item considering the virtual charter school enrollments for this upcoming year. Just as a brief overview, the virtual charter schools in the state had a legislative allowance that allowed them to enroll above the cap of 2592, and that allowance actually expired at the end of 2021-22. We had some legislation this past session that extended the pilot, but it did not extend the maximum enrollment, the provision regarding that enrollment. And so we have a system called the Charter School Average Daily Membership System, which calculates charter school enrollment for the year. And last week, it was discovered that there was a discrepancy between the number that the system generated and the lapse in the legislative provision. So today, later in our closed session, we're going to have some materials to review and discuss and reflect. And after we have those materials, it will help us to guide a motion that we'll take regarding what to do about this discrepancy. So more on that tomorrow. We'll discuss in closed session. We have an item of new business for discussion today, and it's a rules update. So the charter school application and review process has an opportunity to change the deadline for charter school applications from the last Friday in July to the last Friday in April. And the state board actually took action on this last year. And we have some things to do to make sure that change that we would like actually makes it into rules. And so Ashley Vaquero is here to talk us through that and the actions that they've taken in order to make us compliant.
All right.
Vaquero, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Superintendent Truitt, Chair Davis, board members, and advisors. The proposed amendment in front of you is pertaining to the North Carolina Administrative Code, otherwise referred to as rules. And this one in particular governs the charter school's application and review process. And as Ms. White explained, we are simply changing the deadline by which a charter school applicant must submit that application. The previous policy or rule regarding that had it the last Friday in July. We are seeking to change it to the last Friday in April. And as Ms. White referenced, you have approved this change. You approved it in July 2021. However, legal staff delayed submitting the amendment because it was pending legislative review of the permanent rules, which is a process that happens if 10 or more objections are received. So we are submitting this amendment in the hope that the April deadline will become effective before this next 2023 round of charter applications begin. This will come back to you at the October meeting, and that will allow the public comment period to close at the end of September, which is why you won't see it next month. Any questions?
Questions? Not seeing any from my folks here at the table. Ms. Vaquero, thank you for bringing this forward. As stated, this slight move backwards in the timeline allows our Charter School Advisory Committee an opportunity to review before they're brought to the state board. And if we can approve charter schools a little bit earlier in the year, it gives them a longer runway to prepare for opening. So we're hoping that we can get this through and it will be impactful this year. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right, stay right there.
Yep.
We'll move on to the other items that we have for action today. EICS 2 is Central Carolina Academy's request to implement a national school lunch program. We heard about this last month. Just give us the highlights. Have there been any changes?
No changes. They are scheduled to open in a few weeks, and this is a collaboration between the charter school, which will be located in Lee County, and Chatham County School Nutrition Services to provide lunches to that charter school. Lee County was unable to do that, which is why Chatham has that collaboration is between Chatham County.
Fantastic. Questions about that? Do you need more understanding about what's going on here? This is really exciting because it's district collaboration with a charter school in order to provide lunches for underserved students in that charter school. So it's really neat that they're putting their heads together to make sure that we don't have any hungry children.
Absolutely.
Questions? Wonderful. EICS 3 is Art Space Charter School's request to implement a weighted lottery. As you know, weighted lotteries allow us to increase opportunities for access to high-quality education for students that might be educationally disadvantaged. So, Ms. Beccaro, anything new or interesting about Art Space Charter's application here?
No, it is just a weighted lottery. This is a Title I charter school in Buncombe County. They already enroll an average of 38% economically disadvantaged students, and they have set a goal through this weighted lottery to increase this to 55%, which would be over the average of their county, but definitely in line with students who have shown the desire to enroll in the school.
Wonderful. Questions about Art Space Academy's request to implement weighted lottery? Okay. Fantastic. So the last item is a discussion item, and this is going to be a presentation. It's a state summary of the academic gain in our Restart schools, submitting December the 2021 annual report. And Julie Garber, please come to the podium. Thank you so much for the work that you've done on this. We're excited to hear what you have to say today.
Yes. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and board members. Thank you again for the opportunity to share this with you. We have for you the Restart Annual Report Summary from, I'll point out, the December 2021 annual report. So we always like to start to make a connection with your state board goals. So of course we connect with goal number 2, improving school and district performance by 2025. Specifically in objective 7, the growth measure by subgroup, increasing schools. And then very specifically in component number 1, you see restart schools there. And that goes into annual growth, expected growth there. So we certainly track that and provide that for you. As a quick review, just over the course of the past few years, what has been updated in terms of policy. In 2020, we provided asked for your approval of defined academic gain, what that means, components of academic gain, the continued authorization over a 5-year cycle, and the continued authorization workflow. And then we had the pandemic. Just a few, literally weeks later, after that part was approved. And we came back to you in May and then requesting to extend that 5-year cycle, sharing with you that the annual report and asking for this approval would not require performance data because we didn't have it, and then only using the reporting, the flexibilities reporting. So that happened in 2020. And then from there in December, we added from your guidance and recommendation, you approved an express commitment to the model through the duration of the monitoring cycle. And then, of course, in 2021, November, extending the 5-year cycle of monitoring to a 7 for those impacted by COVID. So that's a waiver at the top. It doesn't apply for all time, just for those impacted by COVID. Then what you see here is we have an updated list for you. We now have a total of 151 state board approved restart schools. They are listed by cohort, by when they begin their implementation. And just a reminder to let you know that, get my notes here, just that the state board had removed the restart authorization for 3 schools from 1 district as of June 30th of this year, and then 1 restart application was recently added as well. So you've seen some adjustments to those numbers over the years as I've come forward and shared that information with you. You may notice that there are 2 schools that have been added most recently, cohort 6 and cohort 7. Those 2 schools have been added in districts that are already using the model. They know the opportunity, and we are certainly hoping that other schools will take advantage of this opportunity. Specifically for the December 2021 report, we want to make sure that you understand that these are 135 schools, so not the full 151. At the time, only 135. They were through cohorts 1 through 4. And so that just a clarification of who is reporting in this current report. So we have a reminder for you of academic gain results. So these are the academic gain results components that we bring to you when we bring them and we have performance data. We share with you the information in sections of above expectations, meeting expectations, and below expectations. We do not have performance data from that year, and so we want to point out to you that these are the academic gain components for your review and reminder: the recurring low performing, growth status, achievement score, subgroup growth status, and then the flexibility outcome measures. When we, again, talk about this report that we're sharing with you, we want to let you know that this portion has not been able to be calculated, of course, because the federal government and the General Assembly did not, if we can move to that next slide, granted North Carolina waivers from the school accountability. So there was, although schools and districts were provided data, this data was not able to be calculated for accountability and for school performance grades. And thus, with that same guidance, we were not able to calculate academic gain. So what we're sharing with you today is specifically about the flexibility outcomes, and that is something that they reported on. So we'll move forward with that. We do want to let you know that even though academic gain was not monitored in that way, we still continue to support these schools on a tiered support system. We provide support for all Restart schools, and going from the bottom up, you see all these different pieces that we offer to districts and schools. And then when we move all the way to the top, the schools that were identified based on 1819 data as not on track, we move into a more personalized support system. So personalized review of their annual report feedback, their school improvement feedback, very much so more of a personalized approach for those who are not on track. So with that, we will share with you the flexibility overview from the information that we have from this report. So during the school year of 2020-2021, you can see that the top three flexibilities that were used: budget, employment, and calendar, and then the other ones listed. Just as a reminder, the language on the left comes from what we call flexibility categories. There's lots of different ways to use flexibility for common language across our schools, districts, and the public. What you see on the left are what we call flexibility categories. And we'll be able to dive into more of what this looks like. And so last year we provided this level of data for you, and we'll again provide it for you. We are able to break down this information and share that 128 schools out of the 135 used budget flexibility. It's important to note on the right-hand side, when you look at the graph on the right, a school can use budget flexibility in multiple ways. And so this is a count of the number of times that was used across all of those 128 schools. So 76% report additional staff and flexible staffing use, 42% professional development, 55% instructional resources, 27% stipends or incentives, and 11% new instructional programs. When we look at employment requirement flexibility, we see that 52 out of 135 schools are reporting this employment flexibility. 66 hire or place certified staff outside of their certification. 71% hire non-certified staff. So that is employment requirement flexibility. When we move to calendar, we see that 23 out of 135 schools are reporting the use of calendar flexibility with multiple ways there that you see. I'm going to grab my notes here for calendar. 43% add more time to the school day, 22% add teacher work days, 30% adjust the calendar, 17% have an early start or end to the school year, and 13% engage with a modified school year-round calendar. Again, a school could use a calendar flexibility in multiple ways. And so these are all counted across the 23 schools. Then when we move to standard course of study flexibility, we have 10 out of the 135 reporting the use. 90% use curriculum different than the district, and 20% provide additional course above the standard course of study. So what you see here is none of them are engaging in changing the standard course of study. They're using it as a flexibility with the district specifically in curriculum. And then finally, when we look at assessment flexibility, 12 out of the 135 are reporting assessment flexibility, with 67% of them eliminating the KEA, or what's now called the ELI, the Early Learning Inventory, 17% adjusting district assessments, 8% limiting time on assessments, and 8% selecting alternative assessments. So over the course of the years, we have begun tracking this information as of the December 2018 report, and we can have some information to trend and track what this change in flexibility has looked like. I do want to point out at the very bottom, it's important to note that as we've moved across the years, we've also increased the number of schools reporting, and so that's important when looking at these percentages. So, of course, you see some changes in how they're using it, but it's also important to note those number of schools. So when we move into just sharing with you a little bit of the support that we provide, you've seen this before, but I wanted to highlight a few things for you and a few additions. From your guidance, of course, we are providing an orientation for districts and schools as they are newly approved, but also when they're newly assigned principals. And that happens quite often, and so we make it a practice to work in with the district when anyone is newly assigned. We provide district support, and this is growing. We feel strongly about the district and school collaboration for Restart and how important that is, and we are finding best practices in the field and raising them up for other districts and sharing that. Another piece that we've added is our leading and learning visits this year. We've piloted that specifically for middle schools, and we had 3 leading and learning visits in which Restart Middle School principals got to visit another middle school with exemplary practices. So we had very positive results from that. Another form of our support has to do with school improvement practices. And so these same 4 comprehensive support specialists, just a shout out to them, a great team. I'm very thankful for them. They have developed professional development that it was started for Restart Schools, but has been a really professional development that has been shared across the state for all schools within NC STAR training. So not only that, but the Office of Charter Schools has been a great assistance to us. And again, this past year offered 4 guest slots for Restart principals to join the NC Access. And we are grateful that they have also this summer offered another set of slots for our Restart principals that we will be announcing soon. So we're grateful for the partnership with OCS. We have for you, with all of that information, we have some policy recommendations for you. As you can imagine, COVID has made its impact on everyone, including Restart Schools and including how we operate with Restart Schools. So we have some policy recommendations for you because of that, specifically around abbreviated reporting for Restart Schools who are no longer recurring low performing. The identification of the starting point of when we offer or require support for Restart Schools, and then also this idea of the continued authorization review outcomes, what happens at the end of this review. So we're going to break these down for you and share these recommendations. So in the past 2 years, as I mentioned, Restart Schools have only provided the flexibility outcomes report because we had no data. And we have discovered through this that the opportunity for us to refine this reporting process, and also through our focus groups that we've held recently in June, stakeholder feedback on what the annual report format looks like. So we are currently looking into the report and updating it. In that review, we have discovered the specific language that you see on the left-hand side is so specific, we would like to recommend updating it. On the left-hand side, this is specifically if a school is no longer recurring low performing and the growth status meets or exceeds. This means that the Restart School has accomplished the goal. And this portion is in policy. The left-hand side is what you see currently in policy. It says the school continues to operate as Restart with only the flexibility reporting required. We are suggesting on the right-hand side that the language is simply changed to abbreviated reporting. So these schools, they have demonstrated their use of flexibility. They're no longer recurring low performing. We are saying we want to know from you about what you're doing, but you don't specifically have to report on all the flexibility outcomes. So if you see in the next slide, we unpack what abbreviated reporting looks like. The schools would still submit their incremental goals, their flexibility information, what they are using. It would still be documented in their school improvement plan, but they would not be required to submit their measures and metrics. So, abbreviated for them, they're demonstrating their growth, and so this is an opportunity for them. That is one portion. Another portion that we are recommending to you is the offered and required partnership. And again, we have not been able to move into a required partnership. We offer support continually, but we have recognized that perhaps this support should come sooner. And so on the left-hand side, the current policy says that schools that are declining in growth status and their achievement score, which means they're going backwards from when they became Restart. They were already recurring low performing. According to the data, they're going backwards. This is what it currently says. We are suggesting on the right hand that you see that this offered support is started in year 2 and required is starting in year 3. We've also added the language here to add the word district because truly we've understood it's the district's responsibility for how Restart is implemented, and it's a partnership between the district and school. So we are recommending this language as well. So just a caveat for you, just a clarity of what required partnership support would look like, and we shared this with our stakeholders in the focus groups, that it means that support from DPI would partner with the districts and the school to ensure best practices are in place to implement the Restart model. So it's a partnership together. It's simply an extension of what we are doing now, but it's an agreement with the district that they will partner with us. We offer a lot of support. It is up to the districts and schools to engage with us at this point. It also would be tailored according to the strengths and needs of the district and school. Not every district and school needs the same thing, so it would be tailored for them. So that is what required partnership would look like, the tweaks and the changes. This piece is about the continued authorization review. So to set the stage for this, just a reminder that Restart schools follow that 5-year cycle of review to determine if they're going to continue. The language from the statute says continued authorization. What you see here is in year 4 is the beginning of that review. And in policy, it's a 2-year review process. At the end of that review, in the year 5, we would come back to you. We would share the cohorts going through the review process and share these are the schools that would continue, or what are the other outcomes. So there actually are 3 possible outcomes that we want to share with you at the end of the review. So what this looks like is that on the left-hand side, if we have exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, and not meeting expectations. If a school is no longer recurring low performing and the growth status meets or exceeds, the school continues. And then you see here the piece that I've already talked about. They operate with abbreviated reporting as our recommendation. Meeting expectations, they are meeting academic gain. They are demonstrating that they are progressing. They would simply continue. However, if the school, as we described, if it is the growth status is declining, they are at not met, the achievement over 5 years has been a negative net change, then And this is the piece that's currently in policy. What's in red is suggested, recommended, that the LEA would submit a new restart application or a new plan for improvement. That's in order to continue, they would have to reapply. The recommendation is to add and would be required to partner with DPI for intensive support until demonstrating academic gain. The language there of intensive support is actually a connection to district and regional support's intensive support. So we have that connection there. So here are the possible outcomes, but because of that, because of those outcomes, and because of policy language, there's a fourth that we want to bring to your attention. The policy currently says that schools and districts are required to be committed to the model for the duration of the monitoring cycle. But then here we have the end of the monitoring cycle. So do schools, districts and schools, have the opportunity to exit? We asked our stakeholders this, and we received some feedback and recommendations. And the recommendation is that at the end of the monitoring cycle, if a district has a school that is making academic gain but no longer wants to use the restart authorization as a tool to support the model, the recommendation is to submit an application to remove authorization. And again, that language is also in statute and policy, remove authorization. The suggestion, again, you see is to submit an application. The stakeholders agree that district and school should be of consensus in that determination. There should be a rationale for removal, and there should also be a plan for sustainability if not using the tool of restart. And all of this under a criteria for removing authorization. So, other stakeholder feedback for us, shared input. We asked them for input on some operational practices that we have, and from their input, we are continuing to develop this 2-year process of continued authorization review. We are also looking into what would it look like to develop a formal recognition process for these schools, and we have some great feedback from our stakeholders that we are reviewing and continuing. So again, from your guidance, not only in 2020, but this year, we use those stakeholder feedback groups, and just always grateful for their input. It is very important to listen, and we gather great input from them. As a summary, we want to share with you all of these policy recommendations. You see them broken out in 2 portions. Under the policy section about continued authorization, this would be when a district and school engages in offered or required support, and we are recommending an earlier timeline. Also, at the review, if the school is no longer recurring low performing and meeting or exceeding growth, the language is just changed to abbreviated reporting. And finally, with removing the authority of the model, we are suggesting to add that connection with intensive support. If the district chooses to reapply in order to continue. So I have shared a lot of information with you, and I will pause here and ask for any questions.
You're right, it is a lot of information, but this is a fantastic snapshot of what will be before us. It's a discussion item this month, which means I'm going to turn to you and say, what questions do you have? What has been presented today that has piqued your interest?
I have a question.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you. Going back to the earlier part of your presentation, which was a fine one, by the way.
Thank you.
The percentage of schools that exercise flexibility of the day, school day,
Calendar, yes.
is it calendar or day? I'm not sure. But are they tracking the impact of that flexibility in any way?
They are, yes. That is part of the requirement for all restart schools. So in their annual report, and specifically in that flexibility form, they have to identify what we call an incremental goal for using flexibility. We use the word incremental because schools use those broad school improvement goals. The idea of incremental is foundational, small practices what are the practices in your systems and structures that you're looking to improve? And so if a school chooses to use calendar flexibility, they are adding time to the school day and they want to improve they want to improve student outcomes from interventions. That would be what they're tracking. And they submit that information to us
That would
in the
be-
report.
Oh, maybe at some point in time you can share a little bit of the results from what they're gathering in terms of impact.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
To follow, I'm sorry, Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you, Ms. White. So, thank you so much. You did a fabulous job of presenting a lot of information and made it very, very digestible. Thank you. I have a similar question about calendar flexibility. I'm very interested in the fact that between 2017 and 18 and 2021, the number or the percentage of schools utilizing calendar flexibility was cut in half. Do we know why? Are there theories?
So one rationale is that there are an increased number of schools reporting. Another piece that is a possibility is that we've had larger school systems apply for restart with a large amount of schools. And some of the districts choose to say, and this is a hunch, so I need to investigate if you give me some time. A possible reason is that they may be choosing to say across the district in these large number of schools, you may not use this. And it could have been because of the pandemic, right? So and so please let me investigate that.
Please, yes, I would love to learn more about that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Chair Davis.
Yeah, following up on the superintendent's question, I've heard, informally from superintendents that one of the challenges of calendar flexibility for an individual school within a district is that school's calendar is dependent on transportation services and a host of other systems across the district, that it's difficult to create flexibility for one school when you're having to run an entire district. So perhaps there's some work that could be done to assist there, or maybe that's just a reality of a deficiency in this model.
Yes, it is. It is a reality of the efficiency of it. I'm sure Dr. Bridges could speak to that. We always, when we share with districts and schools about that opportunity to adjust the calendar, we always guide them back to the district and say this is district oversight, and bring up the point that transportation is a piece of this, and that you always have to look at the full picture.
I would agree, and I'd say for our particular district, we do have restart schools. We were able to use some flexibility because we have a feeder pattern, and so that feeder pattern of schools was able to do the calendar flexibility because of transportation. Otherwise, it would have been almost impossible.
Thank you, Dr. Bridges, for weighing in. Any further questions? It goes without saying that one of the underlying outline questions that we really want the answer to is centered upon the academic data that has been in because of everything that has transpired over the past several years. So we are anxious to marry that quantitative data with some of the qualitative data that we've captured to measure whether this is indeed a plan that's sustainable for us when we look at intervention and a source for helping our lowest performing schools in the state. It goes without adding that there are lots of intervention strategies being used for schools that are low performing. All schools that are low performing are not restart schools, and beginning to marry those conversations so that we can make sure that the best interventions possible are being offered to every low performing school in the state. So we're looking forward to looking at that. But thank you. Again, digestible is a great word. It's a lot of information, but thank you for the way that you got it to us in a succinct manner today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Without any further questions, that brings us to the end of EICS. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. White. We'll now move to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. led by Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. This is Act 2, Olivia Oxendine this morning, chairing the Educator Standards and Practice Subcommittee of the State Board. And joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. The first item is an action on first reading, ES&P 1. This is, we'll go forward this afternoon in closed session. And this is the work of the Extenuating Circumstances Committee that meets periodically to hear appeals from educators in our school systems who need additional time to complete requirements for their clear license. So that is coming forward. The next item is an action item, and it is ES&P 2, and coming forward is Dr. Evans. She's ready to take us quickly through this item. We have been presented this information in the past. It pertains to the lifetime license and the conditions for being issued that license, and also the conditions under which a teacher can add an area of teaching to a clear license. So take it away, Dr. Evans.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So I'll start with the adding teaching area to a clear license. And we started out with defining what a clear license is. And it focuses on either having a CPL or continuing professional license. So that's a renewable 5-year license, or an initial professional license, which is a 3-year license with your coursework requirements complete. So testing could remain, but you would have completed your coursework requirements already. And then we also made sure to say which teaching license this does not include, and then also making sure that it focuses on teaching area for only teachers. So this is classroom teachers and them adding a specific teaching area, a teaching license area. And then we wanted to make sure that the clarification for individuals was completing one of the following options to add a teaching area. And so there have been questions about if there's not an exam for the additional area, then what are the other choices in order to do that? And that includes the 24 semester hours in that subject area with a grade of C or better, and then also completing an approved EPP program for that additional area. And then specifically for their proficiency for languages, being advanced low proficiency, and it goes into more depth on number 4. So those are the choices for adding a teaching area to a base license for teachers. And then we wanted to make sure that we noted for this clarification that the teaching area that does not have an exam, that you choose one of the other options that I just went through. In particular, there have been questions more about the 24 coursework hours, so we wanted to make sure we were clear on that. And then going through the lifetime license policy amendment, there were questions around when you're converting your continuing professional license, which is the 5-year renewable license, to a lifetime license, do you have to complete your CEUs for that renewal cycle? And Pepsi had decided that this was not a requirement. So for those that would have the 30 years and want to convert from a CPL to a lifetime license, they would be able to do so without having those renewal credits. However, if they find that they don't qualify with the 30 years, then they would have to, their license would expire, and then they would have to go back and earn those required CEUs in order to be reinstated that CPL. We did also note that for PSUs that at their discretion, they can require professional learning activities for lifetime license holders at their discretion, which is separate from any type of CEU renewal requirement, because as a lifetime license holder, you do not have to renew the license.
questions?
Sorry, I
Oh, I'm sorry, Vice Chair, you turned to my right. Vice Chair
On
Duncan.
there was one of the license provisions was 24 hours, at least a C or above grade.
Yes.
Suppose hypothetically, a student takes 36 hours and gets Fs on 12, but a C or above grade on 24. Is that still good?
I know that licensure looks at the transcript, and they look for 24 coursework hours with C or above. So I would think that they would take from the 24 coursework hours, that would be C and above.
Okay, thank you.
It could be the GPA, the overall GPA. Very good question. That's the kind of questions that I hear a lot. Very good. Other comments or questions about the lifetime license? And I see a hand to my left, Ms. Floyd.
Hi, thank you so much for the information, because I literally was thinking about my own add-on licensure. And I just wanted to make sure that that information is clear for educators to know where to go specifically to get that add-on information. I want to make sure that like districts know where to tell their teachers to go for add-ons.
So for this policy itself, where to read it would be LICN 001, but there's also on the licensure page should have information about add-on license,
I just want to make sure.
add-on teaching area.
Just want to make sure we all have that information.
Sure.
And also, your directors of HR, Human Resources, would certainly have that information.
Yes.
And would be able to probably convene meetings with teachers to explain this new policy.
And this, we have a Friday or a Monday update for HR folks each month after state board.
Thank you. So I want to be sure that I'm clear on something. So with respect to the lifetime license, that will be recognized by DPI for licensure purposes. But my LEA, my PSU, could still require me to undergo professional development or coursework or whatever for employment, to sustain employment.
That's true. That is up to the PSU. But no CEUs are required. No renewal cycle is required for a lifetime license.
Very good. By the way, I have one. I was probably one of the first. So, very good. Thank you. If we have no questions or comments about those two items, we will act on the last one or both later today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So that concludes the S&P for this month.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now break for lunch and return at 12:45.